Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of October 6th, and this is your Monday briefing. It is day 6 of the government shutdown. The Senate is scheduled to be in this week and will address a continuing resolution following a fourth attempt on Friday to vote on the House-passed CR and an alternative CR proposed by Democrats. Neither of the bills so far has had the required 60 votes.
There was an uptick in trade-related developments last week, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But first, how is the IRS faring under a shutdown, and what does that mean for you? Joining us to answer that question is Nikole Flax. Nikole, welcome.
Thank you.
So we're in the early days of the shutdown, and the funds that had been used to kind of keep things moving at the IRS were from the Inflation Reduction Act, and they are going to expire this week, or they're going to be finished this week. So talk about how things are going to be faring after that.
So I think it really depends on what kind of the second phase of the shutdown plan is. There is the option that they could put out the same plan again, but we don't know if that will happen. I think there's been the latest rumor is that it may go back to a more traditional shutdown plan, and I think everyone is, waiting to see what that will be. Traditionally, what the IRS would do is furlough a pretty significant number of employees, but they would prioritize certain activities which would continue. So I would suspect that OB3 implementation would be accepted. That's obviously a big priority for the administration. Generally, compliance activity in a traditional shutdown just pauses, with the exception of protecting the government's interests, so short statutes, that kind of thing. And generally, the biggest pain that you feel is in the service operations where, phones are shut down, can't get issues resolved, that kind of thing. So I think we'll see, we should see by tomorrow what that plan will be and if there will be a change, because we haven't really felt much to date.
Nikole, the IRS has created a brand new position, a first of its kind, Chief Executive Officer. What was the rationale for this, and what do you think this will mean for companies?
So really recent news that just came out, and it's been described as a new position that will manage more of the day-to-day operations. As we've talked about in the past, the Treasury Secretary is currently serving as the IRS Commissioner right now, as the administration decides what the kind of long-term prospect for that position will be. And so the Commissioner of Social Security, it's been reported, will come over and kind of manage the day-to-day operations for the IRS, which I think is welcome news to have someone who can focus on that. These individuals also have other big jobs, but running the IRS is also, needs concentrated attention as well.
And Nikole, last week, IRS released the FY26 Priority Guidance Plan. So we're dealing with a couple of issues here. So there is a shrinking workforce. We've got the shutdown. How are they going to kind of manage this? And could you talk a little bit about the process of dealing with the Priority Guidance Plan?
Sure. So when you look at the Priority Guidance Plan, I think for some of us, it was almost comforting news to have something that came out that felt a little familiar in terms of how things traditionally operate. It is organized in a different way than the past so that you can see this administration's priorities with respect to guidance items. There are a significant number of items on it, more than 100. But when you compare that to the prior year plan, which had more than 200, it has been trimmed down a bit to really focus on what this administration's priorities are. When you look at kind of where the major cuts have been in the IRS, the Office of Chief Counsel has not been cut as much as on the operations side. So I think there are still a significant number of employees who can focus on guidance with the Treasury Department in terms of moving forward some of these guidance priorities. I think it's worth it for those who are more familiar with the older way of having a guidance plan to really take a close look, because there is a category within there called regulatory and burden reduction. And that has a lot of the catch-all categories that did exist in prior guidance plans. So to some extent, it's very different, but to some extent, there are a lot of similarities in the past.
Nikole, there's been a lot of talk about tax enforcement and the extent to which it can be done or executed by technology or AI. Is that really true? And if so, to what extent? But also, to what extent do we still need to rely on human expertise?
So my view on that is there is a lot of opportunity with respect to technology and AI for the IRS. And when you think about modernization, I think that's the key driver. But the IRS has a significant, they have a significant way to go from where they are today to what I think tax administration in the future could look like. At the end of the day, however, though, I think human beings will be very, very important to all of the operations that the IRS has, both service and compliance. On the enforcement side, there is a lot of time that's spent on more administrative type work that, you can definitely see efficiencies that I think would be welcome even by the IRS workforce in terms of, some of the tasks that really technical employees spend their time on. So there is, I think, a ton of opportunity and would expect that tax administration years from now could look much more efficient. But again, there's a lot of investment that needs to be made in technology and some of those tools before they get there.
All right, and finally, are you hearing, I know you're talking to a lot of companies, are you hearing any themes as to what their concerns are and anything you're noticing in the questions?
I think just the uncertainty of the environment is probably top of mind to most companies. The current environment has created some opportunities for issue resolution. It's also created, again, a lot of uncertainty just in terms of what priorities are going to be, who's around at the IRS to try to work with on problems. And, I think everyone is just doing the best they can with the information that they have and trying to stay in touch with, the changes that are coming really every week at this point.
All right, Nikole, thank you as always.
Sure.
All right, and as I promised, Scott, there was an uptick in trade developments. Can you walk us through a few of them?
Sure.
For example, the 100% tariff on movies made outside the United States, and what this means for companies.
Sure. A lot of us are waiting for the courts to resolve some questions with regard to the president's authority, specifically around the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. However, the administration is not waiting. They continue to move with alacrity in the trade space. So they have been leaning very heavily on this trade tool that they have, not something new for President Trump. Presidents have had this power for a long time under Section 232, the national defense rationale for imposing tariffs. They've used this on a wide variety of products. They issued some guidance with regard to some timber and lumber. And what you're seeing there is that they're expanding it. So the so-called derivatives market, not just the specific timber or lumber that might come in, but also products that could be used from it, such as kitchen cabinets and furniture. That's also being hit by the tariffs. You mentioned the movies. That's something that is going to be interesting to see how they enforce that. I think there might be some intellectual property issues that they would have to address first. But then you're seeing them take some of these 232 investigations off the board, like timber, and fill them with other spaces, or fill that space with other investigations. So for instance, now robotics and the industrial tools that you might use at facilities will be under investigation. So any companies that are involved in that space that have robotics within their facilities will have to be very much paying attention. Now what you're seeing is a very quick pace for the comment period. Short windows to submit comments. There's also an opportunity to add items to these lists that you have to watch out for. So you could have companies petition to include or expand the list. So you might have some domestic entities that are saying, yeah, I want to be more in favor of tariffs, whereas others are saying, no, let's pump the brakes. So you're watching conflicting currents running at each other throughout this comment process as well. And those dates happen very fast. So you have to pay close attention before the comment window period closes, and then the government will act. But they are not slowing down on this trade space.
All right, and we'll keep an eye on that. Scott, thank you so much. And Nikole, thank you again.
And for our viewers, a link to recent episodes, including Week in Review with Pam Olson, is in the description of this episode.
You'll also find a link to register for a webcast about the latest CAMT guidance, and we'll cover the guidance in an episode later this week, so be on the lookout for that. Thank you for spending this time with us. Have a great week.